If you're a beginner gardener, watch on to find out about starting seeds in spring for beginner gardeners and what rookie mistakes you want to avoid making. G'day there, I'm Dana from Pewakaika Valley Homestead. Today we're going to look at getting your spring seedlings off to the best start, how to grow your seedlings, the best way to grow them and some mistakes that you want to avoid. Let's get started. Why on earth would you even want to start your seedlings at home from seed? Well, actually it's mostly about saving money. Partly it's because you can get such a great variety of different types of plants if you start seedlings at home. Most heirloom varieties are not available in stores as transplants. However, you can get a huge range of different types of heirloom plants if you decide to start them from seed at home. If you buy your vegetables from the store, you might be looking at between $1 and $3 per actual vegetable if you're looking at broccoli or cabbage or lettuce, those sorts of things, and that can really add up. If you're buying transplants from the store, you're looking at between $1 and $3 for each 6-cell pack. If you're planning on growing your vegetables from seed, however, $1 to $3 can buy you up to 100 seeds. So even at a half germination rate, you're still saving yourself boatloads of money. And on top of that, you can have all those wonderful varieties. Now there are a few things you're going to need when you're starting your seedlings in springtime. First, you're going to need something to grow them in. I prefer to reuse old seedling starter containers that I've got from transplants. You can often pick these up for free. Some plant nurseries run a recycling program where people bring them in and either the nursery reuses them or the public can take them away. You can also ask on some of the gardening Facebook groups or on Craigslist, or in New Zealand we often use TradeMe. FreeCycle's another great place to look for them, and you just have to give them a bit of a wash and they're ready to go. The next thing you're going to need is something to move your dirt. You can just use your hands. I find a trowel a lot better, just less messy I suppose. You're going to need some kind of seed starting mix. Put that down because it's heavy. That's an organic mix that I bought at the local big box store, but you need one that says specifically on it seed raising mix. They tend to be a mixture of vermiculite and like an organic matter, sort of like peat, or some of them use coconut coir. What you don't want to use is the first big mistake is using garden soil. The last thing you want to start your seedlings in is straight up garden soil, especially if your ground is quite clayey. What you need to do is either use a mixture of half potting mix and half like a vermiculite. It needs to be a light, fluffy, sandy mix. As you can see from here, this is very crumbly and sandy and fluffy. And the upside to that is it drains really well and it doesn't stop the seedlings from coming through. Some of the cheaper potting mixes are very wood based and have big chunks of wood in them, and if you use those you may find that your seedlings, one, rot because they stay too wet and don't drain well, and two, the seeds can get stuck under a piece of wood and then they're just not going to germinate. If you use thick cluggy soil from your own garden, generally speaking it doesn't retain moisture well, or it retains it too well and your plants will rot out, and they tend to compact too much and there's not enough air in the soil for the plants to grow. The other thing you're going to need is some labels. I always put the variety on one side and the date on the other side so you know when you planted them and what exactly you are growing. especially if you're a beginner gardener, you might find that a lot of the seedlings all look the same, especially things like brassicas. So your cabbage, your broccoli, your cauliflower, even mustard, and there's a whole bunch of them, but their seedlings all look almost identical when they first come up. So it's always great, and lettuces, a lot of them look the same too. So it's really good to label all of those and put the date on them, especially if you're going to be planting several different types at different times. And of course you're going to need some seeds. These are all heritage heirloom varieties that I have got. There are different, when you're choosing your seeds you have some choices to make. There are GMO seeds, which generally speaking the public generally can't buy. They tend to be for farmers, and these are the ones that are immune to things like Roundup. And so ideally in the home garden we're not growing those things, because we're not going to be routinely spraying everything with Roundup anyway. Heirloom varieties are the old varieties that our grandparents used to grow, and the best thing about those is that you can keep your own seeds from them. While as a beginner that might not be something you're interested in doing, as a prepper it's a great thing to know that you can grow a certain variety, and at the end of the season you can keep your own seeds from it. You're not going to be relying on getting them from the store again. The other brilliant thing about heirloom varieties is there's such a fantastic range of what you can get, especially when it comes to things like tomatoes. You can get green ones and purple ones and stripy ones and pink ones and ones that are ripe when they're green, and all sorts of fantastic things. Whereas the commercial varieties are usually what we call a hybrid, which is when they have one parent of one type and a different parent of a different type. They cross those and the children are the hybrid. And so you can't, generally speaking, the hybrid seeds aren't necessarily fertile, and if you do grow them you're not going to get the same seed that the plant was to start with. So that's why I tend not to grow hybrids. However, there's nothing wrong with growing them if that's what you want to grow, and there are some really delicious varieties available that are hybrids. One of the first things you're going to need to decide is what plants you want to grow and how many of them you're going to want to grow. Now, what plants you're going to be growing at this time of year, being early springtime, generally speaking you want the ones that are slightly more cold tolerant, so things like lettuce, peas and your brassicas, so cabbage, broccoli, kale, those sorts of things. They're the ones to get started now. You can start them inside or in a cold frame. If you're wanting to get a head start on your summer vegetables, so they're your things like squashes, tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, those sorts of things, they are all not frost tolerant at all. They need to be raised either in a tunnel house or inside until well after your last frost date. To find out your last frost date, you can have a look at, generally these days it's easy enough to just say last frost date and type your name and put it into Google. The Farmer's Almanac has a lot of information on their website as well about different areas and your last frost date. Generally speaking, seedlings like this get to about this size in about 4 to 6 weeks, which is perfect size to be planting out into your garden. So what you want to do is work out when your last frost date is, and then count back 4 to 6 weeks and then start your first lot of frost tolerant seedlings. Generally we start with the more frost tolerant ones because, and just in case that happens to be a late rogue frost, but things like peppers and tomatoes and cucumbers and squashes, all those sorts of things that will get killed by a frost, you can start those sort of 2 to 3 weeks before your last frost date and keep them inside until well past that frost date. Keep them covered and safe until you know for definite that the frosts are all finished. So the next thing you're going to need is a tray to set your containers in. Now, just because I use these containers doesn't mean that you have to use these containers. You can actually use anything you have lying around the house, ice cream bottle, yogurt bottle, any of those sorts of containers. All you need to do is poke a few holes in the bottom of them to allow the seedlings to drain. So the other thing you'll need is a tray like this, and then you can just sit your seedlings trays in there. That one's quite a grubby tray, to be fair, but it's because it's had plants in it, and that means you can bottom water, which means you simply put the water in the bottom of the tray and it can wick up into the seedlings so that you're not displacing the seedlings when you're pouring water on the top of them, and it's a brilliant way to make sure they're evenly moist all the time. Alrighty, to actually get your seedlings in the ground, you need your shovel and your pots. Now what we're aiming for is a nice even fill, and you want to gently press it down to get rid of any air pockets. Oh, those ones, as you can see, were quite empty. So you just top them up. You're not pushing down really hard, just enough to firm the soil. Seedlings actually really like firm soil. They like the contact on their roots. It helps them absorb the nutrients and the water the best. Now the general rule with planting seedlings is to make sure that you only plant them as deep, twice as deep as they are wide. One of the biggest mistakes you can make with planting seedlings is actually planting them too deep. If you dig a big hole, you know, down to sort of here on your finger and pop one of these tiny little seeds in there, it will rot before it even has a chance to germinate. It's just too far away from the light. So these tiny little seedlings are really small, and some seedlings, these tiny little seeds are really small, and some seeds are much smaller again. So if you go by the width of those, you're only planting them a tiny wee bit into the soil. So if you put 2 into each of the 6 divisions, it doesn't matter if you put in more than 2, they are very small. And then all you need to do is just gently rough the soil over the top. Make sure there's some firm contact there so that the seeds can absorb the water. And find the little label, pop them in. Where to put my tray? And then sit them into the tray ready to be watered. Now broccoli and kale and cabbage are brilliant things to grow in the early spring. They actually grow better when it's not too hot. Same with lettuce. So you just pop 1 or 2 into each little compartment. If you've got too many, just pop them back in. When you're storing your seeds, it's really important to make sure that they're kept dry. So if you have foil ones, roll the tops down and keep them somewhere nice and dry. So same with the broccoli seeds, you just gently rough the soil over the tops of them and then just firm them down so that they're making some contact. The other plant here is peas. Now peas do grow really well if you direct sow them. In fact, you can direct sow peas before your last frost date. They are usually very frost hardy and prefer the cooler weather. However, if you're anything like me, you have problems with mice eating them. I have a much better success starting them in trays like this and then transplanting them out once they're well grown. The mice dig them up and cut the tops off so they can get to the peas. Now peas, as you can see, are quite a bit bigger. So you think we're going to be planting it at twice that depth. So I usually just sit them on the soil and push them down. And you'll note I'm only doing 1 in each punnet. That's because usually I get a really good success rate with my peas. If you want to, you can put 2 in each, and then if you have too many growing, you can just pick them out and then give them their little label. And the next thing to do is to put some water in this tray. You just want enough water in this tray to come up to those sort of bottom slits. If when you open your seed raising mix it's not as damp as this is, it's a really good idea to pre-moisten it. This is some dry, it's a mixture of potting mix and seed raising mix, and you can see, well, for one thing, those really big chunks. This is not good for growing seeds in, but you can also see just how dry it is, and actually this would need a really good soaking before you tried to put any plants in it. Once you've got your seedlings all in your tray like this, now you just need to put them somewhere that they're going to get plenty of light and plenty of warmth. You have two options. One is to bring them inside, especially if it's still quite cold where you are. Another option is to place them into a cold frame. Seedlings need a lot of light, otherwise you'll end up with really long stalks and very few leaves. These ones here have had plenty of light. You can see they're quite short, compact and fairly sturdy. These are actually at the perfect size to start planting out into the garden. If you're growing your plants inside, you need to make sure that you're using plenty of either natural light or some grow lights. Using natural light means that you grow them just inside a window where they're not getting direct sun, but they're getting plenty of light. If you're planning on using grow lights, you need to make sure that the grow light level is about 10 centimeters or 4 inches above the top of your seedlings. So when you're first germinating them, that's 10 centimeters or 4 inches just above the actual containers, and then as your plants grow you need to have the ability to raise the lights up. Right, this is our cold frame, and this is where I'm going to put the seedlings. Once you have your seedlings sitting in your cold frame, what you need to do is just to simply keep them damp and not overwater them. Over the next sort of 10 days you'll probably start seeing the seedlings starting to sprout, and that's a good time to make sure they're getting plenty of light. The best way to know when your plants actually need water is to look at the top of the soil. If the top of the soil is looking damp and dark, it is still perfectly fine and they can go another day or so without any water. If the top of the soil is light and looking dry and powdery, you definitely need to give them a water. If your plants are starting to look limp and pathetic, you've left it a bit long to give them any water. Don't worry, you can water them now and they'll probably come away. However, try not to leave it quite so long next time. The more shock that the plants go through, the slower they're going to grow and the harder time they're going to have when you transplant them out into the garden. That's all I've got today on getting your seeds started in springtime. If you've liked this video, I'd love it if you'd give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments below what it is you're planning on getting started this week. If you've got any questions, please drop them down below as well and I'll do my best to answer them for you. We'd love it if you would subscribe to our channel. We release videos twice a week on growing and preserving your own food and other homesteading topics. Thanks heaps for being here. I'll see you in the next video.